Good morning. Welcome to the Ways and Means Committee meeting, City of St. Louis Board of Aldermen. This meeting is generally for the public, and we'll be going through the budget. We have Mr. Paul Payne, Director of the Budget Office, and he's going to explain to you exactly what's going on with the City of St. Louis fiscal budget this year, 2018 through 19. So if you'd like to speak, we would ask you to come up and sign in on the sign-in sheet. If you have any cell phones, if you can put them on vibrator or silence, we appreciate that. And we'll go ahead and start the meeting. So, Mr. Payne, welcome to start. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members of the committee, and good morning to all you members of the public. I'm going to start the presentation here. All of this material I'm going to be going over is also on the city's website in case you haven't. I think we might have a couple of hard copies here in case you need those as well. All right, starting off, the proposed FY19 budget is $1,111.6 million. That's an increase of 5% over the previous fiscal year. What you see there, when you hear that, sounds like a pretty large number, which it is. But when you look at the category of funds, you'll see that there's only so much of that is discretionary. For instance, the general fund, which is the largest of the operating funds, funds most of your operating departments, parks, streets, fire department, most of the police budget, is $516.6 million. And that's a 0.7% increase, not much growth there. But you look at the special revenue funds. Special revenue funds are funds where it's a special tax for a special purpose and those kind of things. The use tax, the public safety sales tax, things like that. It's $172.8 million. That's a 25.1% increase. And the reason why we have such a large increase in that category is over the past year, if you recall, we had the economic development sales tax passed in the previous year. This will be the first full year of the receipts from that tax, as well as the Prop P tax, which was both a sales tax and a use tax combination. And so that's what's generating most of the growth in the special fund categories. Grant funds, $61.5 million, a 13.5% increase. Most of that category, the increase relates to police grants, which are up $2.1 million, and SLIGHT, up $5.6 million. The debt service fund, that's $5.9 million. It's pretty much flat, 0.4%. That's the fund we use to pay off our general obligation debt. So there's a small piece of the property tax you pay each year that pays for what all is outstanding on our general fund obligation debt. Capital improvement funds, $37.5 million. That's a decrease of 5.9%. One of the reasons for that decrease is simply because some of the debt is rolling off this year. For instance, the Justice Center, which is about a $10 or $11 million payment, it's beginning to be paid off, and so the next couple of years you're going to see that go away entirely. But there will be other capital items I can be talking about later in the presentation. Enterprise funds, $232.6 million. That's basically your water and air. They operate as separate businesses in effect, and that's a 2.7% increase. Internal service funds, those are funds charges among departments, so that's not really outside money. That's, for instance, our health insurance fund and all that kind of stuff. That's that category of funds. It's 4.6%. So you can see the budget overall is up 5%, but as I mentioned, the general fund is up less than 1%, and special revenue is up 25%. And the general fund budget's just under half the total budget. So, talking about the general fund, we look at some of our largest sources of revenue and how we're doing this fiscal year. Earnings tax, 35% of the budget. And year to date, it's a 1.6, but that's through the third quarter, but it's trailing estimates. So, usually you got about 2.7% increase or so. So it was up 1.6, so it is trailing this year. Payroll tax, similar story. Also trailing, it was up 0.4% through the third quarter of this year. Sales tax, although it did get a slow start, it actually is picking up, and it's 2.3%. Overall, we're looking still at a shortfall this year of about almost $5 million in revenue. And then we had some expenditures. So we're still going to need to do a supplemental appropriation before the end of this fiscal year just to ensure that we remain within budget. FY19 proposed annual operating plan gap. This is an exercise you go through each year and you say, look, what are the revenue estimates going forward for at mid-year? How's it look? What do we know of our fixed increases, decreases, and our revenue outlook? And then you present it. I've been doing this quite a number of years, and it's very rarely or actually never, that I see a surplus on this sort of exercise. It goes up and down in various years. In recession years, you can see a number greater than $30 million gap. Here, what we ended up with a $10.5 million gap. And I'll briefly run through this. Beginning revenue base of $510.4 million, that's this year's budget, beginning revenue. As I mentioned, the adjustments, we're about $5.5 million below that right now. The refuse fee, if you remember, we increased the refuse fee this past year, so that's a $3.6 million in the full year. And then growth, we allow for some growth, 1.6%, that's $8 million. So that gives you $516.6 million to work with. All right, so then you look at the budget and say, well, what do we have to pay for? Well, we got police pay increases, overtime, health insurance. Fire, they have a grant that's expiring that's been paying for a portion of salaries for the fire department. Now the general fund has to pick that up next year. So that's a $1.1 million increase. We've got pay increases for the rest of the city's service and health insurance as well. Some lease debt obligations. I mentioned the Justice Center lease going down. That's $5.7 million. We do have the first year of the Scott Trade Center debt at 1.5, and the Carnahan Courthouse debt, which we had some savings prior years because of a refinancing that now we have to pay the full year's cost at 0.8. Workers' comp, unemployment comp, personnel costs for fire and police training or police testing, forestry weed cutting. That was an initiative we approved this fiscal year, about $100,000 over and above what we usually allocate for that. Of course, the refuse division, I mentioned the fees up above. We still have, we're allocating at least half of that to purchase of new refuse trucks. And then there's also the initiative for illegal dumping and trash enforcement that we're including within the refuse division budget. Now, one item on here that's did want to point out, and it's important, I'm going to get to a little later in the presentation, that fund balance contribution of 1.5% of pay. One of the things that we are often, you'll see that we do not have enough of is our reserves. And I'll be talking a little bit about the importance of having budgetary reserves. But that was a $3.4 million set aside. So that was part of our gap that we went into this year. So you can see if you add all that stuff up, that's $526.5 million. That's $10.5 million over the budget revenue. And so how did we address that gap? Well, we've got about $5.4 million in cuts scattered through various departments. And then we did have some special revenue funds going up. Use tax fund also increased, gaming fund, and so those type of things are able to pick up some of the pressure on the general fund. Some of the reductions by department category in general and government finance, mayor's office was down 3 positions, personnel was down 1, and we deferring some of the promotional testing to police and fire departments, et cetera. In Parks, Recreation, and Forestry, they had some attrition savings, $300,000. Judicial offices, the circuit courts were down a couple positions. Circuit attorney, no change in number of positions with some salary savings. The sheriff was down 5 positions. Most of the other changes, public safety, obviously that's one of the topics, as you know, when we had the Board of B&A budget presentation, the reduction in the neighborhood stabilization officers. That's in that category. That's why that's down $1.1 million. The cost of that program was just under $800,000. Public safety and police, reduction of $2.4 million, mostly through salary savings. They're not filling their positions as much. And then Board of Public Service was down 1 position of facilities management. So that's a total reduction. There's most of your reduction to $5.4 million. General fund revenue, the outlook. As I mentioned before, the earnings tax represents about 35% of our budget at 179.1. That 2.7% increase is pretty much in line with what we'd expect in a normal growth year. In some years, you're not going to see growth. Fortunately, we're still in an economic growth cycle, which makes it a little bit of a challenge when you're still struggling to get that budget balance even when you're in a growth cycle. So, property tax, $62.3 million. It's a 1.5% increase. Sales tax, $53.9 million. That's a 1%. Sales tax, while it is up, it's not one of our strongest growers. Typically, it is a long-term growth trend is about 1% or less. So it's not something that we've seen much strong growth with over the years. Payroll tax, that's the half-cent payroll tax paid by businesses on employees, on employment within the city. That's at $39 million. It's a 2% increase. The decrease you see under the franchise utility tax category, those are taxes on utilities. We did receive a one-time settlement agreement from Ameren UE that was through all municipalities within the state. And so because that was a one-time payment, you'll see a decline next fiscal year. Intergovernmental fees, 8.1%. A lot of that increase relates to the timing of the payments we're going to be receiving from the state for prisoner housing and things like that. We also get Medicaid, Medicare payments for EMS, and that's what's in that category there. Licenses, mostly the graduated business license, those are mostly fixed rate fees, so you don't see much growth in the license category. And under the department fees and fines, that's everything else. Basically, you've got building division fees, you've got parks fees, things like that. At $56.5 million, that's a 2.5% increase. So overall, you can see that revenue estimates up 1.7%. And in the pie chart below, you can see what representation for each of those categories. And I won't belabor this. I sort of went through the highlights on the expenditures by department. You can see the non-departmental is down simply because of that 6.5%. That's mostly because of the debt service that we're paying on the Justice Center that went down. The increase in county offices, see that big 15.6%? That's the election board. The election board is on a cycle. You know, we have scheduled elections every other year. There's two state elections, 2 city elections. This year there was none. Next year there's 4, and then the following year there's none. So it goes up and down each year. So each year you're going to see either an increase or a decrease depending on where you are in the election cycle. Streets, 7.6%. Again, that's most of that increase is in refuse, reflecting the spending related to the refuse fee. Let's see. And that's pretty much where you see most of the big changes. And I should point out, public safety comprises about 56% of the general fund budget. Okay, special funds. Remember I told you that we have a number of special funds for which certain, by ordinance or enabling statute or enabling ordinance, allocates the resources to a specific purpose. One of the larger ones is the local use tax. That's been up 23% this year to date. It includes, but that was anticipated in the budget mostly because it included the impact from the economic development sales tax increase, which is known as Prop 1 from last year. And the allocation for FY19 includes a full allocation for affordable housing plus $500,000. So it's the regular allocation for affordable housing is $5 million, and we had not been fully allocated for a number of years. Now we have the full allocation plus an additional $500,000. They also have a beginning fund balance, which they're appropriating at $257, which produces that $5.8 million budget. Healthcare Trust is also fully allocated at $5 million, and Building Demo is fully allocated at $3 million, which would be $2 million over the original budget and $1 million over there was a supplemental during this fiscal year. So, but that is basically the full allocation of the use tax receipts. The rest of the excess use tax is used for refuse, housing conservation, police, the health division, and human services. Now, the economic development sales tax is estimated at $20.6 million, is allocated also by ordinance, and you can see the components there. That's the one where 60% of that is allocated to transit, which is to expand our transit system in the city. And then 10% for each of the following categories: the neighborhood stabilization, workforce development, public safety infrastructure, and the city infrastructure. In the budget right now, the only one that actually has been allocated specifically is the city infrastructure capital fund. That's the $2 million. By ordinance, that goes through the capital fund. So that is, you'll see that incorporated in the capital fund revenue. Lead and building demo funds, those are funds allocated to those special funds by a building permit. 60% of the certificate inspection fee remains in the general fund. The lead fund balance actually has a balance of about $3.2 million. But the building demo and board up fund is still at a negative balance. And so that's also receiving a $500,000 from the use tax demo fund to help reduce that negative balance. That is slowly getting out of deficit situation simply because we've had more activity with building permits. Gaming fund, over the past number of years, gaming has seen a steady decline in the amount of receipts we've received, except for this year. This year it was up 13.8% through the third quarter. And so that's actually something good, and one of the things we're going to be able to use in our supplemental appropriation this year, because that is a turn of events, because that's been one of our declining revenue sources. Okay, the new half-cent public safety sales tax known as Prop P. There are two components of that proposition. There's a sales tax piece, which is estimated at $19.5 million. And then there's the accompanying use tax revenue increase of $3.9 million, for a total of $23.4. And the ordinance which established the Prop P fund allocated certain percentages, 66% for the police department for pay raises and benefits and pension increases, that's $12.8 million. 28% for the fire department, again, about a $6,000 pay increase plus benefits and pension, that's about $5.5 million. And then the circuit attorney for staff and raises gets 6%, and that's $1.2 million. So that's the sales tax portion. Now the use tax portion also have some percentage allocations, and you can see in that chart. The after school and jobs programs, 25%, that's $975,000. That's being allocated both to youth jobs as well as a new youth cadet program at the police department to encourage young people to pursue a life in law enforcement. So that's a new thing that we've got in this budget. Circuit attorney also gets a chunk of the use tax portion of these funds, and that's $300,000 for additional staff and raises. The recreation programs, you'll see in this budget, that's 25%, $975,000. That's for, you'll see in the recreation division, they have additional 11 positions and some contractual programs within the director of parks budget. Building demolition also gets a piece, the 17.3%, that's $675,000. And then we have social works, mental health programs at the Department of Human Services, and that's another $975,000, 25% of the total. That includes 2 positions at the Department of Human Services as well as some contracts. So that's your total of 3.9. So that's the total allocation of your Prop P funding. Jump one. Okay, the capital fund, as I mentioned earlier, was $37.5 million. You can see the allocation for the chart itself. The big differences in this year's capital fund are that currently everything is fully allocated, whereas in previous years we had reduced some of the allocations. For instance, in the ward accounts, that's $9.2 million this coming year, and then the recreation center improvements, $0.6 million. Sure.
I have a question about the special fund that you have. So the city, am I correct, self-insures by having a fund to cover if the city is sued, they don't have an insurance policy?
We are self-insured.
So where is that in the budget? And how much is that?
We are budgeting next year $5 million.
But what is that total fund right now?
Oh, it almost gets depleted each year. I mean, it is not some big fund that says, hey, we've got enough to cover. I mean, we're basically, it almost.
Every year allocating.
Yeah. Some years you might have a little left over. Some years, hey, you had to run out and then you had to pay more the following fiscal year. But it's not, there is not some big fund balance in sort of a judgment account or something.
So the next allocation is $5 million?
We've got, and if you look at it, you'll see $2 million in the city councilor's office proper and $3 million in the city councilor's police unit. So for a total of 5, and you'll see a line item that says that. Yeah.
So Paul, just for the process, do you prefer to, ask a question? I had some earlier, but I was trying to wait till afterwards.
We will come back to all your questions. So, yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Sure. Hey, no problem. Let me get back to where I was. Okay, yeah, and the capital fund, and I won't go into any much more detail on that, but you can see 14.9 million existing citywide debt. One of the challenges we have with capital is that that seems 37.5 million might seem like a lot. Over half of that is for existing debt service agreements, both with our existing citywide debt and other parks and major parks improvements. We got that parks debt. And so what it limits your ability, with all the needs we have on a capital basis, for capital needs, we have so much limitations on what we have available to address them. So that's always a challenge. Personnel changes by fund, these are totals. General fund is down by 23 positions. Overall, we're down by 32. And you can see the special fund category, that's up because of the new sales taxes. Historically, again, a 10-year history there, we're down over 700 positions since FY09. The general fund's down 405. Pension funds. This is always a topic of conversation when it comes to budget time because it's been a rather large cost, particularly in more recent years. Pensions are actually going down slightly this coming year by $2.5 million, simply because the markets have been performing a little bit better, so some of the contributions to the systems have gone down a little bit. We also had what's known as an experience study on the new fire retirement plan, which actually ended up with a reduction in one of the amount of disabilities that were in that plan, which is actually a result of an earlier effort for reform of that plan. So that was a good thing. And on the next page, I've actually got the details. You see 3 headers there, but there are actually 4 plans. We have an employee retirement plan, that's the first column there. The fire retirement plan, there's a frozen fire retirement system, and then there's the new fire retirement plan, and then we've got the police retirement system. They're all close to about 80% funded. The frozen fire retirement system plan is almost fully funded because it is frozen, and the fire retirement plan, the new one, is 60%, but it's only 4 years old, so it's actually not bad from just the age of the system. And then police is slightly under 80%. I think one of our challenges, however, is the fact that it costs so much. If you look at it, it's $82.3 million in this budget, and you can look down at the bottom numbers how much it cost per active employee. I mean, with the police department, for instance, it's over $29,000 per year. I mentioned earlier, I talked a little bit about the unreserved general fund balance. If you look at this chart, and I'll just sort of summarize, you can see the importance of this thing. If you remember, well, we all remember the recession back in 09 and 10. You can see what happened to our fund balance back then and why it was so important. Because when you hit with that suddenly, you can see some revenues decline, almost falling off a cliff when the recession fully hit. And at the end of that fiscal year, both FY10 and FY11, you can see when we started at $24.5 million in reserves on a cash basis, you ended up losing about $16 million in those 2 years. Okay, and so since then we've slowly built it up, not to where we need to be yet. Our target is 5% of the general fund budget, which would be considered a minimum target. Most people would say that 10% is more likely the norm, and so we're at 16.5 million, which is just over 3%. So we're not even to where we need to be at the 5% level. But one of the new initiatives in this budget is to set aside an amount within the budget as a sort of a mechanism for contributing each year. And it's just sort of out of sight, out of mind. You need to set aside, just like you would in your household. We want to set something aside for savings. And that's about 1.5% of salaries is $3.4 million. And so we hope that's similar to what we do with something called the 27th pay reserve each year. And it's something that it's a good budget practice to make. And so finally, summarizing, the budget's $1,111.6 million. It's a 5% increase. It's got full year budgets for the economic development sales tax, public safety sales tax known as Prop P. It's got full allocations of the use tech funds for affordable housing, plus an additional $500,000. And building demolition, as well as capital funds for ward, cap, and recreation centers. General fund at $516.6 million. That's a 0.7% increase. It includes funding for new initiatives, particularly refuse, but also proposes some cuts and reorganizations, and then obviously, which is what we're looking at through this budget process. And then it also establishes an annual mechanism for strengthening the fund balance. And of course, while it's balanced, we still have these longer-term challenges. As I always mention, we're entering our 10th year of economic expansion, so you wonder how long is that going to continue, and we need to be ready for when the recession hits. Obviously, the next recession is just 1 year closer. Strengthening our revenue growth and base and reserves is always a challenge. Continuing the pension reforms and financing of our capital needs. And I'll mention one thing about the finance capital needs. You'll notice we do have a proposal in August for a bond issue. If you're not familiar with that, that is again, we have some existing general obligation fund debt that's falling off. So what the proposal is to issue new debt, so it wouldn't be a tax increase, but it would take the advantage of the fact that it's rolling off. That's proposed in August. That's also available. That information is available online, I believe, and a lot of it's for replacing fire equipment, police equipment, things like that. So you can take a look at that. But that will be coming up in August. But that's another important step of trying to address our capital needs. And that's the end of the presentation. So we'll take questions from here.
I have a two-part question. The 2.06 million that's going to public safety infrastructure and the 700,000 going to the youth cadets, is that included in the 56% that's going to the police? And what exactly is included in public safety infrastructure?
Yeah, I'll address that. That's in addition to the general fund. The 56% you're referencing is the percent of the general fund going to public safety in total. The public safety infrastructure, police related, that's the portion of the economic development sales tax. The details of that, they're still working on in terms of how they're going to appropriate that. But by ordinance, it was 10% to each of those four categories. And so, so that's the allocation in the budget reflects what the ordinance allocated by ordinance. Was there a second piece of the question?
What is the public safety infrastructure?
Okay. Okay.
Okay. And excuse me if I mispronounce your name. I apologize. Is it Derek Laney? Laney? Okay, good.
Good morning. So, my name is Derek Laney. I'm a member of the steering committee of Coalition Against Police Crimes and Repression, and I wanted to talk about the outsized public safety portion of the budget. We're investing a lot of money in public safety, more than half of the budget, and CAPCAR, along with many other organizations, have done forums, and we've gathered information that talks about how we can reimagine public safety. Right now, when we look at our public safety budget and how huge it is, and we look at the effect of having such a huge budget, we see that we are not moving the dial on violent crime. We're not moving the dial on even barely on property crime. And the huge thing that a lot of people are talking about is violent crimes in St. Louis. What we're doing is we're constantly throwing good money after bad on a model of arrest and incarcerate, and it is not changing violent crimes. And we have some ideas about how that can be changed. There are models around the country. There's the Cure Violence program. There is Richmond, California, who they're doing very effective things, evidence-based program to reduce violent crime and getting at the root of violent crime. What we're doing here in St. Louis is not even scratching the surface of violent crime. What we're doing is we're categorizing people as folks that we don't want, and then we're over-policing them. And so what I'm here to suggest is that we take a different approach, that we reallocate the budget to those things that work, that have been proven to work around the country to reduce violent crime, that we take money out of the bloated public safety, particularly the police, because what the police are doing with the arrest and incarcerate model is not working. And we have to really wake up and say, if we're constantly hiring more police and doing more hotspot policing and using agencies like Hunch Lab to do predictive policing, all of those don't work. They have been proven not to work to reduce violent crime. What they do is that they increase the mass incarceration. And so I'm saying that we should consider alternatives that are evidence-based, that have proven to work, and reallocate our budget to incorporate some of those ideas, even try some pilot programs.
Very good. I agree with you to a certain degree. You know, we need a new approach. We need to think out the box. Right now, the budget's pretty much set, but you're always welcome. You can send me information. We also have the public safety chairperson here, Alderman Terry Kennedy, who's, I'm sure, open to ideas, and we're willing to listen to you. Any new approach that we can have in order to make it a better city, to spend our money correctly. At the same time, I think public safety, you know, when it comes to the police department, is important. The violent crime that we have in the city of St. Louis needs to be reduced, and I think a lot of that is up for discussion when it comes to dealing with families, homelessness, you know, mental illness, you know, lack of education. So it's kind of a large subject that we can sit down and discuss and try to work out things. So, but I appreciate it. Appreciate your idea.
So when will we actually get to the point where we're actually taking money from things that we know not to work and putting it in places that might work, that have been proven to work? Like, so I'm not saying all of this just to have a say. I'm saying this to see when will we make those decisions?
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, well, we need to sit down and talk about it, and decisions need to be made. But right now, you know, we're dealing with a crisis with the city of St. Louis budget. I mean, our budget is okay, but right now we're looking at laying off NSOs, you know. Just like the budget director stated, we're 700 positions that we're not going to restore with the city of St. Louis. So I know your main complaint or concern is allocating the funds to public safety, police department, fire department. You feel like that needs to be streamlined and cut back. I understand that. But we have a tough budget that we're dealing with right now. So right now we just want to try to balance our budget, you know, so we can proceed July 1 to pass it out. Okay, all right. But I appreciate you considering good questions. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Oh, my list. Mrs. Rogers, forgot about the list. I'm not used to a list.
Before I start, excuse me, I have a couple of questions for the budget director. One of them is, I saw reflected in the budget the debt to the Scott Trade Center. I didn't see the dome debt. And from what my memory serves me, that was about $144 million when the Rams left that we were saddled with. So where is that in the budget?
Yeah, no, the debt for the dome and the asset preservation for the dome is $6 million a year. It's included in the citywide accounts. What you saw on that list was the change. So we've had that, as you mentioned, we've had that debt since the early 90s. So when you look and see what's going up, what's going down, it's not on that list. What's going up, the Scott Trade one was a new one, so that's why that was on that list. But yeah, we're still paying off. We'll be done with that in 2022.
The other question is related to, it looked like there was a 25% increase for recreation, and I was wondering what exactly is that?
I believe that's the slide where it says it was a 25% allocation of the use tax portion for Prop P. And that's used for recreation programming. And if you look in Prop P, it's got its own fund, 1125, if you're interested in looking at the books. Under the recreation, it's got 11 new recreation positions. And then under the Director of Parks, there's a line item for contractual services as well. So that's $975,000 in recreational programming.
Okay, thank you. So, distinguished members of the committee and to the chair, I thank you for the opportunity to come today. Just want to talk a little bit about what the previous speaker talked about, because the Organization for Black Struggle, who I'm representing today, is a member of the Coalition Against Police Crimes and Repression. And for the last 2 or 3 years, we've dealt with these town hall meetings on re-envisioning public safety. And so one of the things that was clear to us is that citizens want to have more input. I mean, there's been a number of taxes that they agreed to pay for above and beyond the normal taxes, and yet they don't see themselves getting the benefits of those. And so one of the things I just want to say today is like what people re-envisioned was not just more police, because public safety is more than police, but they really wanted to double down on the root crimes of crime. And so they didn't come up with pie in the sky stuff. They came up with more recreation for the kids, and not just for the kids, but for adults too, because one of the things that has never been explained adequately to me is how we voted for a proposition for more recreation, and we end up building 2 privately managed recreation centers that most of our kids can't go to. So the need for recreation is still out there for poor and working class families. So that's one thing. But they also came up with things like special services, like mental health services, like community mediation, livable wage jobs, adequate housing. So these are things that people think are not being done by the city of St. Louis in a comprehensive and holistic way. And so what I'm proposing is a different approach to the budget. I think Derek spoke to it a little bit. But what we were doing with those town hall meetings across the city, we think Ways and Means should take to scale. We should be having a more robust conversation about what it means, because what typically happens, and Paul knows that I was a part of the budget process when I worked for the city, is that when come time for the budget and it needs to be reduced by departments, we just start whacking. You know, you got to whack here, you got to take so much money off here, here, here. And it is indiscriminate, it is random, and it's not helpful in terms of really re-envisioning what we need for the city. So what I'm saying is we need a comprehensive, collective, thoughtful process that leads us to a place where we're not pitting folks against each other. We're not pitting North Side against South Side, old people against the young people, that we're looking at what do we want for all of our citizens, not parts of the citizens, part of the communities. And so I'm suggesting that we look at places like the police forfeiture money, the asset money. That's not a slush fund for the police department. That's millions of dollars there that we have seeming like little control over what happens to it and how it's spent. We also have a lot of TIF and other giveaways that's happening. We have untapped taxes that, you know, corporate folks are not paying. So when I think about a cash-strapped city, there are places where there's hidden, untapped, and monies that are being used in other ways that we need to start looking at. There's going to be a gathering here in St. Louis next week, and they've asked for the Organization for Black Struggle to do a bus tour. As the tour guide, I can assure you I will not be taking them to the Gateway Arch. I will not be taking them to the trendy places in Central West End. I'm taking them to places where the majority of black folks live, where there is a reflection of policies of disinvestment and abandonment, where neighborhoods have rows and rows and blocks of housing or no housing or dilapidated housing, where there are food deserts, where there are no services. I want them to see the underbelly of St. Louis, not the glitzy thing that we promote in the tourism trade. So, you know, these are serious things that our people live with every day that need to be addressed. And I think it's time for the budget to look like and reflect a more futuristic view about what we want the city to look like. It's not going to be a white city. That's dead. So we want to make sure that we get the representation that we need, and that we look at a city that is changing, that's looking at all the factors, both the challenges that you talked about as well as the opportunities, and really begin to plan a place where people can live and work in safety and security.
Thank you. Okay. John Chesnoff.
So there are a contingent of us here from the Coalition Against Police Crimes. I'm co-chair of that organization. I had one question for Mr. Payne. If I captured it right, there's $36.6 million in the police pension fund. I was wondering where that money comes from. Is that a general budget expense, or is it allotted from some other revenue source?
That is That is entirely general fund.
Okay.
Oh, well, no, let me take that back. There's a portion of the public safety sales tax from 2008. You remember the earlier tax? 5.5 million of that was allocated to police pension. 5.5 million of that was allocated to fire pension. So most, I shouldn't say it's all general fund. Most of it's general fund.
So that's reflected in the 56% of the budget that is public safety?
The 56% of public safety is, of the general fund, includes both the police department, fire department, and corrections, and building division. That if you look at it, if you look in the detail, it's going to be anything with a 600. It's basically that department. So it's more than just the police department.
Right.
Yeah.
But that pension money is part of that.
The pension money for police is almost all general fund, but there are some special fund pieces of that total.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
So then I did want to add to some of the reflections we've had so far. I counted up this morning on the way in here that I've been active on issues surrounding the police now with 6 different police chiefs. And every one of those police chiefs has said at some point during their tenure that we can't arrest our way out of the problems that we have. They all have recognized that. And yet we continue to spend the vast amount of our money to arrest and incarcerate. And so the rhetoric and the understanding has not matched up with our budget allocations so far during the 20 years that I've been paying attention to this. One of the things I watched, and I really appreciate the video because I was able to watch the Ways and Means Committee hearing with the chief of police that happened last week when I was out of town. And one of the things he said was he divided up the 67 homicides that we've had in the city so far, and he said that there were 29 that were drug related and that were addressable by the police department. The other ones he said were personal vendettas and domestic incidents that the police department really can't have much of an effect on. And so here's our police chief admitting, declaring that less than half of our homicides can really be addressed by the police department. And that is our number one concern when it comes to public safety in the city. And so, again, I asked the same question that others have asked before. Why, when we're admitting that these problems can't be addressed by the police, why are we spending our money on policing and not putting more money into some of the dealing with the root causes of these incidents that might bring us real public safety? Thanks.
Thank you. John Watson Jr.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to address the issue of the NSO reduction. We were concerned as a neighborhood, and I have a letter that I brought. I just want to read our letter concerning that plan to reduce them. As residents of the 18th Ward and the Academy community, we're alarmed at the plan to reduce the number of neighborhood improvement specialists assigned to the wards. We would like you to strongly consider keeping the NIS personnel at present level. Our experience as a community with accessing city services and resources to address our ongoing needs to resolve problems concerning public safety, forestry, trash, crime, housing, landlord, and etc. has taken a dramatic turn for the best since the assignment of the NIS to the Academy area. The NIS personnel give the city boots on the ground to address the issues of their particular ward assignments. They have been valuable in making sure that our concerns and complaints as citizens are addressed with the right resources in a timely manner. This kind of response and service from the city has allowed the community to be optimistic and hopeful as we continue the ongoing planning and improvement in our city. We would like you to consider keeping the NIS officers presently. They've been very helpful in the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris Wilcott.
Good morning. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. My name is Chris Wilcox, and I've been working with Community Builders Network and the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Coalition to support and expand the work of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and the work that it does to create quality homes, shelter the homeless, support the community. We support further investment in the city by the city in this work, not only because it helps St. Louis's most vulnerable with its annual expenditures directly benefiting poorest residents, but also because it is a sound investment in its future. Our coalition of over 30 organizations supports expanding the trust fund's resources by $2 million from the use tax revenues of Prop 1 last year, in addition to the $5 million minimum. This is because we can make a down payment to address the city's most urgent needs and make the kinds of changes that attract investment and support families who want to live in a thriving and equitable city. The Affordable Housing Trust Fund directly addresses the needs of St. Louis's most vulnerable citizens. A person earning minimum wage would spend up to 67% of their income on fair market rent, and African American families alone spend over half their income. 28% of African American families alone spend over half their income on housing in St. Louis. Over 28,000 people are looking for affordable housing on St. Louis Housing Authority's waiting list. And St. Louis homeless programs work tirelessly to administer to its needs while the number of shelter beds declined over the last year. The trust fund and its grantees provide these services every day and could reach more people given additional funds. The Affordable Housing Trust Fund is also a sound investment for the city. Every dollar it spends on home creation is matched by $17 in public and other public and private funds. Property values increase with affordable housing investments, which provides revenues for its schools and other city services. With the city receiving half of the CDBG and home funds that it received 15 years ago, and the uncertain future of LIHTC from the state, the city needs these investments now more than ever. Finally, investing in the trust fund can address vacancy and improve public safety. Vacant buildings can become attractive, safe, and energy efficient and accessible homes that breathe new life into the community. With 1 in 4 children in St. Louis public schools being housing insecure, trust fund projects can give children environments free from toxins like lead with stability that they need to succeed in school. Affordable housing has also been shown to reduce crime in disadvantaged neighborhoods, making it a way to make the city safer for police and for the public at large, while addressing these critical issues at the same time. We recognize that the budget decisions are complex and there are not enough resources to address all of its needs. However, our coalition believes that the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is an efficient and equitable program that addresses many of our critical priorities all at once. By investing an additional $2 million, we can seize our future and expand opportunity in St. Louis to make it a fairer and more prosperous for all. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to share our coalition's vision and thank you for your service to the city of St. Louis.
Thank you. Okay, I guess it's our last speaker unless we have someone that wants to sign up. Yes, sir. Would you like to speak? Come on up. Sure.
Hi, my name is Jake Lionfields. I'm a resident of the city of St. Louis.
Jake who?
Lionfields is my last name.
Okay.
Yeah. I was wondering if you could go back to the slide that shows the difference in per employee expenditure between the fire department and the police department. Yeah, so this is something I didn't really understand, and I'm here learning, so I'm just trying to get a sense of, you know, if we're looking at the pension funding, the employee retirement pension costs versus the fire retirement pension costs versus the police retirement pension costs. I mean, these differences are staggering, and I'm curious in general why there are discrepancies here, but in particular, I'm curious about why there's a difference between a $5,000 difference, approximately $4,000 difference between the fire retirement pension fund number and that police retirement pension fund
Sure,
number.
yeah, and don't feel like there's no dumb questions with pensions because it's a
Yeah.
very complicated issue. The employee retirement, first of all, we have to realize is that that's not apples to oranges, and that the employee retirement is we also have Social Security.
Mhm.
So the employees get a pension plus Social Security. So that's why that is a lower number. With fire and police, that's their entire pension. They don't participate in Social Security. So you would expect them to be higher. Okay, but having said that, it's still a pretty high. It's still a pretty high cost. Now the two systems themselves have a different structure of benefits, and so while their salaries might be comparable, the benefit structure is different. And as I mentioned earlier, you've got, actually with fire, you've got two systems. You've got a fire retirement system. which we reformed a few years ago, that plan is frozen. So benefits earned as of the date back in 2013 are frozen. And then benefits going forward accumulate under the new plan, and there was a reduction of benefits for those not vested at the time, and new employees a different structure of benefits. So you start with that, you started to see the costs go down. And so hopefully that's the case. Now with police, the big challenge with police is that that's not something within the city's control. It's Jefferson City. So while we've got local control of the police department, we do not have local control of the pension. So it's not, so the reforms that we implemented on fire are ones that we could not actually do with police. And although it's something that still needs to be pursued. But yeah, that is an expense, it's an expensive benefit.
We don't have control over the retirement, the pension sort of plan structure, but we have to fund it.
That's correct.
Yeah, that's how we feel about it.
Yeah, that is a typical response. Yeah, yeah, that's, welcome to our world.
Yeah, okay. Goodness. Okay, my second question was about this note on the side. So, you know, we're about to enter 10th year of economic expansion with unfunded liabilities of $436 million.
Right.
I was just wondering if you could explain that a little.
Yeah, my point on that one is that if you look at the funded status, you say, the state generally has a way of measuring whether you're well-funded or not. And they say you can't even increase benefits until you're at least 80% funded and all. And with 80% being a benchmark, hey, it's relatively well-funded. And if you look at it, we're pretty close to that point from an actuarial basis on each of those plans. But my point with the note is that we're at the 10th year of economic expansion. When we were back in the 90s, at that point in the expansion, we were over 100% funded with most of our plans, right? So if there's a recession 2 years down the road, you're starting out at just that level. And so it's only down from there. So that's caution number one. Caution two is that you still, even at that level, you still have $436 million in unfunded liabilities, which means you have to continue to pay in this coming year $82 million to both the amortization of that unfunded liability and the normal cost of the pension itself. So that's the point of that note.
Okay, gotcha. And I guess this isn't exactly an accounting question, but when it comes to, you know, renegotiations of police contracts with the city, that I presume includes conversations about pension benefits. So how does that marry up with what you told me about how the state controls?
It can, but you just have to realize we don't, I mean, you can say, hey, we can support this, or we can support that, but we don't have any legislative control at all.
Sure.
So it's something that, there was a proposal this year in Jeff City for a reform package that didn't make it through. It made it through the House, I believe, but not the Senate. So, and so there are efforts to try to do that, but.
Was that Shimon Dogan's bill that would have adjusted that, or? I mean, I guess that doesn't really matter. Okay, I guess and this is maybe more for the committee, but then is the mayor's office lobbying for this in Jeff City to allow us to control?
I can tell you that I personally went to Jeff City this past session twice.
Yeah, okay.
To testify on a reform package that the PRS board itself promoted.
Okay.
And so, again, it had some success in the House. I think it failed and it didn't get promoted through the Senate. And so, again, that's just another year you're gonna have to wait for any sort of reform for the next session.
Are we unique in terms of a county that isn't allowed to negotiate or control the structure of the police pension?
I believe Kansas City is also in the same.
We're the only two in the country.
We're the only two, Kansas City and St. Louis are the only two in the country that can't control their pension structure for police.
Right.
The reason I'm asking all these questions is, well, this is news to me. I didn't know any of this. And frankly, it seems a little bit absurd because if we're looking for savings, I mean, the fact that we have a $5,000, $4,200 difference per employee in terms of retirement costs, I mean, yeah, you have your salary for your employees, but 30% of the cost for employing somebody is, roughly speaking, is the benefits that they have, potentially more. And to see a $4,200 difference between the fire department retirement plan per employee and the police retirement plan per employee when we're about to ostensibly hire 100 plus more police officers because of, and give them raises after passing Prop P. I mean, that just seems like a staggering liability for the city. You know, this isn't an anti-police thing, pro-police thing. This doesn't really make sense to me financially, and I'm wondering why, you know, now I know, but this seems absurd to me. So.
No, and you're absolutely right in terms of the cost. And I'm always talking about, you know, you said there's salary and there's compensation. So, and I think nowadays when you have, I think people who get hired today, most of them are looking on salary. Because they're not really thinking pensions.
Sure.
But you have to pay for it. You're gonna say, okay, well, if you want a higher salary, then we have to be able to address these other costs of compensation. Because there's no way you're gonna have enough funds to cover both salary and then have a
Yeah.
pension.
Yeah, okay, thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you. Margaret Williams.
Kind of short. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. And I'm here. I'm a resident of the 18th Ward, a citizen who lives in the Fountain Park community, and I work with the Fountain Park, Lewis Place, two organizations. My concern here today is about our neighborhood stabilization people. A few weeks ago, myself and probably 20 or 30 other people came before the Board of Estimate and Apportionment and spoke to the severe kinds of impact that would take place in our communities if we lose those people who are our neighborhood stabilization people. Now, I understand about budgets. First as a single mom, then as a married lady, then as a widowed lady, and back to being a single mom, and now married and retired. So I know that there are sacrifices that are made in all areas. But our neighborhood stabilization people have provided us, and in our case is Chevette, Wayne, who have provided us with the hope that St. Louis City really is turning around and caring about North St. Louis. The meeting that I attended a few weeks ago, there were people from all over the city who looked all different kinds of colors and races and cultures. My concern is for our entire city. This is where I live. This is where I was born, and I've spent almost all of my life here. I want our whole city to be stronger and to be better, and to provide a good place for where everyone can live. I know the city did not officially accept Team 4, but the Team 4 effects live with us today. And the neighborhood stabilization people who work for us and work very, very hard in our area have been invaluable, because that was the beginnings of a turning around of neglecting North St. Louis and really putting in both finances, time, and bringing about change. A budget works on both sides, those things that cost and those things that save, and then there's a part of growth. The benefit of our neighborhood stabilization people is, number one, in our community where we've had a lot of trouble with dumping. She has really cut out a tremendous amount of that, because the word is out. She takes pictures. She has encouraged people who haven't participated in our neighborhood group to come to the meetings, because she has done something to help them with that tremendous problem where people who probably don't live anywhere close to us have been dumping in the past. In addition to that, we talk about building stability in our communities. When people can see that they can live a little bit better, a little bit cleaner, with the possibilities of hope for continual change, then they are encouraged to stay here. And those, I'm talking about everyone, of course, but particularly those people who have financial abilities to leave. I believe sincerely that the elimination, not only of our community, but of other communities as well, of people who have brought hope, will cause an additional exit from those people who have another place that they can live, where they have better control over some of the issues that we face in our community. She has been a tremendous help. We have talked, yes, with our alderman, and he's been there and he's done what he can. But he's not in the alleys. He's not on the streets. He's not able to drive around and still do the other responsibilities that he has. I also have a question for you, because we brought up not just my things here, but there were a whole series of things, and I wish I had brought those notes of all the other things that the neighborhood stabilization people have done for their various communities. But at that time, it was put back into the budget, and there was an open discussion about other ways that the city could adjust the budget to keep the communities up, which keeps the property values up, which brings in more city revenue. And then also because of the large number of developments that are going on in small pockets and in a few larger pockets all over the city that depend on the kinds of work that the neighborhood stabilization people have. So I'd like to conclude by asking just a couple of questions. What happened to that original change that was put in by the Board of Estimate and Apportionment? And then the other question is, after we get through talking here and the other citizens and myself have left and you go back, what's the next step? And I apologize if that was right in the very beginning of the meeting and I missed something.
Okay, thank you. Well, to your first question, this body, the Ways and Means, will be working on trying to pull money out of a certain department or several different departments to restore the NSOs. I think the majority of us would like to keep and retain our NSOs. So we'll be working on that in the next couple of weeks. But just want to kind of explain the process to you. Once we send over our recommendations to Board of EMA, then once they figure out if they'll accept our amendments, then they send it back to us. But Board of EMA will have the last say so. But I think this body of the Ways and Means will do everything to try to restore the NSOs. I mean, majority of the aldermen, I believe, would like to retain their NSO. In retrospect, I just want to touch on the police department and the retirement system. Years ago, before we got local control, which was a tough fight, and we went up to Jeff City several times to testify in order to get local control. And majority of the state legislators had the opinion to paint the pictures, well, we just want to get our money, our hands on the retirement fund, which was totally false. That's right, and I'm, to a certain degree, kind of glad we don't have the retirement fund dealing with the police department. We just wanted local control, something I think that the residents ought to have a say-so in their police department and have control of it. And who's done an excellent job, has been working on it for many, many years, has been Alderman Terry Kennedy, okay? And he's the one that really advocated to get local control and form the Citizen Service Review Board, okay? So he's done a great job with that. So I just wanted to kind of touch on that. We really don't have control over our police department retirement. That's fine, but we probably should. But at the same time, I'm just glad we have a say-so and some input in our police department. It's not perfect, and I think we've come a long way compared to the way we used to be, kind of constructed and formed, so we're still working on it. Yes, ma'am. Was those your questions, or you got anything more to say?
Okay, so and then let me see if I'm clear of this. So what you are listening to today, you all do go back and you then discuss it again.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll have several meetings, the Ways and Means, and then we'll make amendments to cut. We could basically cut. But if we cut, then we could try to move a line item over to restore the NSOs or whatever we're trying to restore. I'm not saying it's going to happen because it has to go to Board of ENA, and they make the recommendations. They have the last say-so.
Okay. One last thing, and this is also a revenue kind of thing. It has been one of the things I've been concerned about as an individual, as a citizen of the city of St. Louis, and paying my taxes, and even sometimes paying them late because money wasn't there until it came. And that is the large, and I mean large numbers of people who have vehicles, who have their temporary paper plates. They are parked on our streets. They are driving down. Some of them actually have dates. Some people relatively brag because some people are printing those up for them for dollars and cents. There are people who are struggling to pay taxes who make even less than I do, and I understand that. And perhaps as you and the Board of Aldermen can look into ways to provide an additional step or something for people who are struggling. But I think this is what the law, it's so large now, it's beyond just a matter of finances. I don't have to do this because nobody's ever going to do anything. So if you, one way to increase tax revenue for the city, for our state government, is to find a way to get that particular problem under control. The city will come after us, those of us who pay our taxes. But if you, as a person in our community said, if you don't pay the taxes, they'll never send you the warrant and thing to go to court, because you know. So in other words, just don't do the right thing and the legal thing, and you'll escape punishment. Something's wrong with that picture. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Would you like to?
I just wanted to share with you, and you can share it with the community. The Collector of Revenues Department has where we can make arrangements where you can pay towards your taxes every month if you want to. Because I know sometimes it's a struggle if you have to do it in one lump sum at the end of the year. And he realized that a few years ago. So check with the collector's office and share it with your community that people can go and set up accounts and like pay, you know, a certain amount every month and make it easier for them to achieve that goal. Okay?
And I know that, and we talked about that when we had people at our community meeting. And it's way beyond, it's way beyond just us who will do it. Now it's just, this is an escape route. And so I don't have to obey these laws.
I do understand.
But thank you.
Any other members would like to chime in, or?
No, not really. One of the things I wanted to say, when we talked about Prop P, a portion of that money from the proposition and then the use tax goes to the circuit attorney's office, and they do have a diversion program in the circuit attorney's office. It was funded by a grant, and they're looking for more funding in this budget, as a matter of fact. And that is to keep especially nonviolent criminals out of the system, because that gets to be, you know, it goes on for a long time. So we are working on that as a body, and the circuit attorney herself and that office has what they call a diversion fund, and we hope to fund that and keep that going. So I just wanted to make that a couple of people made that point about incarceration for nonviolent things, and that is kind of foolish. You know, so anyway, thank you.
Very good, okay. Before we adjourn, we'll definitely take, you know, all your comments and questions and consideration very seriously. If you'd like to submit it in writing, that would be fine too. I know I'll be reviewing the tape and taking notes, some of the comments that several of the residents have. And also wanted to bring up Alderman Terry Kennedy, if he doesn't mind, to kind of address. Go ahead. You're welcome. You have to come to the microphone.
What it is that I'm very interested, as chairman of public safety, what you were talking about in terms of revisioning public safety, and hopefully you have compiled that information in some kind of data. And perhaps what we can do is have a public safety committee meeting, a public meeting where you can come and discuss revisioning that with the committee. The committee has had some informal discussions about rethinking how public safety should be functioning, how the money should be spent, because clearly it has not been as effective as it could be. If you notice, the African American Automatic Caucus pushed for monies for the crime prevention programming for youth. What our position was is that really what policing primarily is on the back end of a series of things that causes a person to go into crime. If we can eliminate the issues that causes a person to go to crime, you can also reduce it. But that is a long-term investment, which oftentimes cities have a difficult time in doing because They want to see some immediate changes. But we really need to rethink, and I'd like to bring you before the committee to discuss it in more detail, because we've been having that within the committee itself. That's all I had. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Okay, if there's nothing else, yet, okay. Yes, sir, come on up. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Alderman Williamson. I've got a quick question for, Jerry Connolly from the Shore neighborhood, the 8th Ward. Do you mind bringing up slide 10? So the proposed changes in special funds, which has the economic development sales tax. Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong here. My understanding is that that is generated from Prop 1, the economic development sales tax. Okay, so that passed in April a year ago. Okay, now is there a board that's constituted to determine that spending?
Yes, the ordinance contemplates the board, I believe those appointments there.
Right, so, and I don't know if any of the alders can speak to this. My understanding is that the Board of Aldermen has confirmed the appointees from the mayor's office, but there are additional spots on that board from the public schools and from the Board of Aldermen itself, and those people have either not been designated or haven't been approved.
That one I can't, I'm not familiar with.
Is that something that could be directed to President Reed and the mayor's office?
What was that question again?
The status of the economic development sales tax board. That should be an easy, I don't know.
Yeah, we can find out, but we don't know.
Right. I mean, it's like we're,
Here's somebody from the mayor's office.
Yeah,
The mayor's appointment, Jay Shannon to the mayor's office, the mayor's appointments have been for the board, they have been approved. The missing spots that you noted have yet to be filled.
Okay.
So you stand correct.
okay. So we're 14 months in, I mean, just point of notice, we're 14 months since that passed, and there was a mechanism put in place for deciding how the money's being spent, and we still don't have that committee formulated.
Okay.
And just one other brief comment, and this is kind of piggybacking off Ms. Williams and what she said about the challenges of people, you know, paying their taxes and so forth. I think that if you go for a home loan, healthy home loan repair application, you've got to document you've got homeowners insurance, you've got to document that your property taxes are paid. And we've got a scenario over at the St. Louis Development Corporation, and I don't know what the reasoning behind it is. I don't know if it's because of staff overload or lack of a system. We have a system, we have examples where developments are happening and they're receiving generous tax incentives, and at the time of the board bill going through the Board of Aldermen, some of these projects, the property taxes aren't even paid. And some of the developers themselves have, you know, delinquent taxes on commercial properties or even their own residences. So I think if we're constantly imposing new taxes on citizens, a lot of them regressive taxes like sales taxes or the site-specific SIDS, and we don't have control measures for people who are recipients of substantial public subsidy. And I encourage you as a board to, you know, talk to
Yeah, I was
Director
unaware
Williams.
of that. I didn't know. But I think majority of the aldermen and alderwomen feel like they would not support another tax levy that would impose on the residents of the city of St. Louis. I think we've been taxed enough. We understand that with the, you know, lack of revenue the city of St. Louis is generating, but at the same time, we just can't continue to put it on the residents' back and just make them pay for everything. So we understand that. We take
Right.
that under consideration. Yes, sir.
And one more point, I promise it will be the last point.
Okay.
A lot of our incentive programs, you know, the message we hear is that, you know, without this 16-year tax abatement or without this 23-year TIF, this project wouldn't happen. And there have been about 3 or 4 examples in the last 6 or so months where very large projects have actually sold. So the Whole Foods project, the Orion in Central West End at West Pine and Euclid, that project recently sold, and potential profit to that developer could be $10 million, and the public is seeing nothing from that net benefit to the developer. The Everly project on Del Mar, they started leasing up last spring. Within 6 months of it being leased up, that developer sold the project, and that's a $65 million project. And the city is losing out on somewhere in the region of $500,000 to $800,000 in property taxes per year from that project until, I'm trying to do my math here, but somewhere in the region of like 2022 or thereabouts before we'll be reaping, full lift. So whoever purchased that is getting a great deal. So I think that really needs to be looked at, some kind of clawback if a developer's selling within the incentive
There
period.
is a clawback in the contracts. It has always been one. So, when you get a TIF from the city of St. Louis, if you sell your project, we go back and we do get our funds based on what is going on there. And it's even if you had one of you mentioned even about the home repair loan, if you decide to sell your home, we also take our funds back too, based on how long it's been. If you've only had the loan 2 years or 3 years, we take back whatever funds that we put into it out of that sale contract. So that is an addendum to all of our contracts.
Well, it's not for tax abatement. I mean, if it
Tax
is, I'd like to
abatement
see
goes with the
documented.
property, so there is no loss. Tax abatement goes with the property. So if I buy your house and there's 10-year abatement to it, and you've only been there 2 or 3 years, that abatement goes with the sale of the property. So nothing is lost to the city of St. Louis in a way of, I don't know how you can consider that a loss, because it goes to the property.
Well,
They can't
the
give it
abatement
away.
is attached to the property regardless
Yeah,
of who
it's
owns
attached
it.
to the property, so
But the city
you
is,
selling it, you can't benefit from it. It stays with the property.
well, you benefit if someone in my neighborhood, in the Shore neighborhood, buys a house 3 or 4 years ago for $370,000. Now they're selling it and it's on the market for $400,000.
They would have gotten that anyway. Has nothing to do with the tax abatement.
Well, I guess my point is, particularly with commercial projects, is that the benefit of the incentive is reaped up front by the developer, and they're able to turn around and sell it without any clawback. If that project on Del Mar at the Everly wasn't possible without a tax savings over 16 years, how come the developer can sell it at market value, 6 months after they complete it? Anyway.
Everybody's willing to buy it.
We'll put the facts out to the public, okay? And
Okay,
it'll be-
I'd like
and it'll be
to
clearly identified so that we can all understand it.
Okay, well, I'd like to see
Okay.
it specifically on the Everly, on the Starbucks on
We'll put-
South Grand
we'll
in
put that
Sydney.
out, 'cause I
I'd
think
like
that's
to see it
important.
on the Whole
When we
Foods.
put information out like that, I think it's important for us to clarify it in absolute detail so it's understandable even to a 4th grader, because that is not exactly how it operates.
Well, I look forward to seeing
Okay.
that information. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, that concludes our meeting today. Thank everybody for coming out and being concerned. We're still adjourned. Thank you.